Very good evening to all our viewers and welcome to today's edition of the Evening Review. My name is Vincia Cloete, your host. Tonight we are happy to have on the set Vincia Cloete. She is the Executive Director of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance, and she's here to talk to us about corporate governance in general, and perhaps just to use that as reference to some of the things that are happening in the country right now. Vincia, what a pleasure to have you on the set tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Trevor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. Let's talk about, I think really the reason why we invited you tonight on the show is that because the corporate space, the corporate governance space is in a very critical moment at the moment, and it's not just about the events that you referred to in your article on Friday, your well-publicized and well-received article on Friday in Namibian Sun, A New Era, where you made reference to Namcor, but corporate governance in general, that there is a lot of conflict between boards and CEOs and managing directors. What is the common cause in your observation of these things when they occur time and again? What has been the common denominator for all of this?
Okay. I think it's relationship, first of all. So that relationship is multifaceted. Part of the relationship is the staff friend board. So when you find that boards have a too friendly relationship with staff members, and so it literally flows over into a relationship where there's no, delineation or just that impartiality that should remain between the board and management.
Yeah.
So that relationship that is too cordial, of course there should be a cordial, respectful relationship, but it should not get to a place where the board is overly involved in being a friend to the staff members. Then it is also out of control management, where management or the executives are out of control because they do not understand their role in governance, and they want to, for instance, decide or basically decide on the kind of information that they want to feed the board, for instance. And then the other end of the coin is where the CEO is dominant because the board has appointed a CEO and then they went to sleep basically and never really took care of the oversight of the entity. And then again, on the other side of that coin, you find that the board micromanages management basically, or the operations of the entity. So instead of just keeping the oversight role of the board, they then tend to dwell also into the issues of operations, which is uncalled for. The bigger issue here also, because I said relationship, is that lack of trust when you appoint a board or you appoint management, that you don't trust one in another, and that lack of trust obviously brings about that asymmetry in information sharing, for instance, and just the other aspect of it, lack of disrespect. So the two, I think, go hand in hand. Lack of respect, the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So those are some of the dynamics of the relationship that cause that there be a sour or unsavory relationship between board and management.
Yeah. In the past, Vincia, the way boards used to be appointed in our country, it was really it was more political than professional. And then I think through the PEGA, the Public Enterprises Governance Act, I think there's a stipulation, I don't know where it's coming from, that somehow now these board positions have to be advertised and that people have to be really interviewed and display competence. And I thought, now that you have professionals who have been filtered through a very competent system, that they ought to know the boundaries between their roles and those of the MDs and CEOs and so forth. But we continue to see these things. What's the problem?
Well, that question beckons me to go into two things. The one is that, of course, the ministry has come up, or the ministry or the Department of Public Enterprises has come up with a recruitment process whereby directors are interviewed before they take that role as directors. And then they have a subsequent process of induction where directors are trained or inducted into their position, and hopefully management is included, where they also understand the role and the responsibilities that both parties play.
Yeah.
If you remember what we spoke about in the beginning, that relationship and the dynamics thereof, then that question then, requires us to go back to that and say, yes, we know our roles and responsibilities, but there's also that interpersonal aspect of things. So you will know that, or if we don't know, then the greater aspect of governance is ethical leadership, and that requires that leaders conduct themselves in an ethical manner. And obviously ethics require a lot of aspects like integrity, how you conduct yourself, honesty, transparency, and a lot of other aspects and values that you want to incorporate into that. So when you come to that softer aspect of leadership, then it's almost like when you say you are trained as an accountant, but you not necessarily have interpersonal skills. And so those two need to be linked. And I think maybe in our training of directors and also management, we need to get to a place where we train each other on interpersonal skills or soft skills that have something to do with human relationships. Because even when the other aspects are there, and I know that I only have oversight of the business, and the other one knows that theirs is the daily operations of the entity. Even when that is clear between the parties, when lack of trust comes as a result of those, interpersonal or personal skills and personalities and characteristics that are personal and innate to one person, then obviously we need to cultivate and enhance those as well.
One of the observations that I've made is, I suppose, egos, where people say, for example, that if I'm a CEO of an institution and my board that is supervising me, my bosses, technically my bosses, are a bunch of juniors, might be middle managers at their workplaces. Some of them are not even might be managers at all. But they are now coming to impose their instructions, and some of them not very legal, on me, and then I start feeling like I know better as a CEO, being supervised by juniors. Do you think that we must make it crystal clear that those serving on board should be really at a particular status in order to be just even naturally be the authority to these MDs?
I think that goes into the question of composition of the board. Obviously, one of the biggest aspects is competency. I don't think the appointing authority, which is the ministry, if we're talking about public enterprises, the Ministry of Public Enterprises obviously has a consideration of the holistic requirements of the composition of the board. So the one aspect is that obviously they are young directors, and age plays a role, because I think I was speaking the other day at the 29ers platform for young people who also, speak on political and economic issues, and who want to be professionals that serve on boards. We have to create a space for young people to be able to serve as well. Why? Because there's fresh thinking that comes from young people, because they are probably disciplined or cultured a different way, and then we have to balance that with the older crew on the board, because of the expertise and the knowledge that they carry, the institutional knowledge, as well as just that expertise that they carry with them. But composition of the board includes other dynamics, the diversity in terms of age that I've just spoken about, but diversity in terms of gender roles, and skill sets, competency, and so on. So when you consider putting a board together, there are certain aspects that need to be considered, and age is one of them. You mentioned that the CEO might, for lack of better word, condescend on somebody who's younger because they don't have the same status as them elsewhere. But in this boardroom, they are the boss. And that respect should be there. So remember that lack of respect that we spoke about in the beginning then comes to play. They should have that respect for the person who gives the instruction, because that is the person that's giving the instruction at the time. But you also mentioned that if you are given an illegal or unlawful instruction, that's a different consideration altogether. Obviously, it's not a matter of whether you are complying or even obeying a certain instruction. It's a matter of whether this is legal or not. And if that is the case, you'd want to bring it to the board's attention, number one, and address it on that level and say this is illegal because in terms of this legislation or in terms of this practice, you know, it goes against that. So that's a conversation that must be had to make it clear to whoever is instructing you that it is an illegal. And in law, you don't have to follow an illegal instruction. But you also, in terms of the relationship and to guard and preserve the relationship, I think communication is important. And you'll learn when we want to deal with issues that we have on the table, like the one we're talking about, that unsavory board management relationship. Communication is probably one of the biggest things that's lacking that we need to deal with, because if we have that right, there are many issues that we can actually rectify.
It's important what you said, Vincia, especially in sort of grooming upcoming executives and business leaders, to say that, you know, you need to throw them, a few of them in boards, so that they then organically grow into these roles. The reason why I asked that question previously is because I think there was a conversation 2016, 2017, roundabout there, where it was almost becoming a policy, but I don't know how it ended or where it ended, that somehow, if you are going to be supervising a CEO of an institution, especially public enterprises, by being a board member, that you ought to be at least be an executive manager at your workplace. If you are in full-time employment, for example, that you be an executive or even a CEO yourself, in order to actually supervise another CEO, and that you cannot be a junior to this person if you were put on a scale. Do you think that is a sensible thing to do?
I think it's sensible in terms of maybe the type of leadership that you're obviously going to undertake as a board member. The boards are the ultimate management of the entity. They have the oversight role over the strategic direction of the entity. And so, I mean, this person should at least have the aptitude towards, you know, strategy, for instance. So, yes, there's a level that you need to bring into boards. Yes, there are executives executives that are young, but that's the exposure that they need. And we're not talking about anyone because of age. We're talking about young people who hold a certain stature and a certain position that are able to serve on boards. And again, when the ministry or the appointing authority considers the composition of the board, they're definitely looking at factors like what you've just mentioned, competency. And competency obviously comes from perhaps that position that you hold in a different entity that can bring value to this table that you're going to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. We go for a quick break and then return with Vincia Cloete.
NMH at 1 brings you news from all corners of Namibia. NMH at 1 aims to reach viewers countrywide who are interested in current affairs in a short and sweet format. This show is broadcasted on NTV, 1up2.com, and cross-shared on the following Facebook platforms: The Republican, Algemeine Zeitung, Namibian Sun, Namibia Media Holdings, Irongo, and Vindic Express. To share your news or advertise on this platform, contact NMH1 at synergy.com.na. NMH at 1, your lunchtime news companion.
Our conversation with Vincia Cloete continues. Vincia, what has been do you see the difference between how things are happening now? I mean, in the past, SOEs fell under sort of line ministries. If you were MBC, you'd report to the Minister of Information and Communication Technology. but now they've been, especially the commercial ones, have been put under the Public Enterprises Directorate ministry before it became a directorate. Do you think that has been very helpful in having this integrated strategy of having them under one pot than it used to be scattered all over the place?
I think now it's dual actually, so it's not necessarily,
you're
yes,
right.
so it's dual now. So you still report to the line ministry in terms of the core mandate of that ministry, and then for governance purposes, you report to the Ministry of Finance and Public Enterprises. So is it a good or a bad thing? I think it's good, because then the Ministry of Public Enterprises, or rather Finance and Public Enterprises, has brought about zoomed focus or spotlight on corporate governance, and that's what we want to bring about in public entities. I mean, there are these issues that we're talking about, and we need to deal with them in a systematic manner. We need to deal with them in a coordinated manner. And I think when investors look from outside, when we speak of PPPs and the investments that we want to bring to countries, they look at corporate governance and how our entities are faring in that space. And so now what the ministry needs to do is to amplify its role and to make sure that we actually bringing about and promoting good governance in public entity space. So it's not a bad thing. I think the focus on corporate governance being amplified is actually a good thing, essentially for the country, because remember, governance is about leadership and governing the state resources and the state assets that we have been mandated to be custodians of.
Yeah. Speaking of this simmering and persistent conflicts between boards and management, the executive, what is the role of these line ministers in actually arresting the situations, making sure that there's harmony between these two structures? And should ministers actually be attending court cases and writing letters to police?
The last part of it, let me start there and say that perhaps let me start with the former part of the question. I feel that it's two-pronged. Number one, at the stage of appointing the authority, the appointing authority should, when it's appointing the board, appoint a competent board, and that includes the skill sets and the composition aspects that we spoke about, and it also includes training them and inducting them on the soft skills. And obviously, when you're appointing the board, you've considered all these aspects, hopefully so. So that's on the front part of things. At the back end of things, which is what is happening here, where the relationship has gone sour because we had not anticipated, for instance, the dynamics of the relationship, even amongst the board members already. And so that relationship is so multifaceted that it's not just management and board. It could just also stem from the relationship that is amongst the board members. And this is why, I suggested in my article that board culture is the next thing that we should deal with, and I'm coming with that. But while there is still in abeyance, for the question that you've asked, I think at the back end ministry, there needs to step in, or the appointing authority needs to step in only to do an impartial and objective assessment of the situation. And it should be so independent and so impartial so that no one is implicated in the outcomes in terms of their role that they have played in the process of assessing the relationship that there is or that has gone sour. So that needs to happen. And of course, if we have not done anything to prevent the situation in our appointing stage and in the middle stage of inducting and that ongoing professional relationship that has been cultivated over the time, if we have not done that well, now in the back end, we need to do a better job by stepping in only to do an independent assessment. And I think in the time, and as I've suggested in my article, in the time that due process is being followed to do that independent assessment by an independent body through the instructions of the appointing authority, everybody has to step aside. So that means that in the interim, perhaps you need to replace the board with a different board, an interim board, and you need to perhaps replace the managing director or the CEO with an independent person or person that's acting for the time being while the investigation is being finalized. And also in this matter, the matter is now sub judice, which means it's before a court of law. A part thereof, not the entire matter, but a part thereof is sub judice, and of course we can't discuss it here, and it cannot be discussed because it's for court consideration at the moment. But while that is happening, an independent assessment that needs to take place, that needs to come up with findings and recommendations on how to cure the relationship. It might just be that after that assessment, you will bring the entire board back, or you'll do a board refreshing. So there are other solutions to that, where the shareholder will probably need to do a board refreshing, where you need to do a small turnover in a number of board members, and just look at that composition, whether it was suitable for this specific organization. And you'll probably want to do a refreshment on the management level as well. If we're talking about that specific scenario of board management relationship, I wrote about the specific entity in 2018 as well, because it was again fraught with the same issue. And if that is the case, maybe the line not the line ministry, but the appointing authority should then maybe have a deeper look into what could be the issue at the specific entity and what could be the issue on that level, so that this is something that's rectified once and for all. And obviously, different institutions or different organizations require different treatment, but that assessment actually helps you to do that bespoke assessment that fits that organization and brings out the issues from that assessment, from that specific organization, and deal with it appropriately. So we can't say especially what the outcome would be, but we can say that if an assessment is done, we can come to a place where we can resolve the issue for the long time to come.
I have two questions for you. We have 3 minutes left, but two questions if we can fit them in. One is that why are these conflicts only rife within the SOE space? The private sector you barely hear this kind of things. Is it entitlement? Is it conflict of interest? I mean, like, people are conflicted and they have personal interest in certain things. Why is it only rife, particularly in the public in the public enterprise space?
So I have not done the assessment to say that there is no strife on the other boards that are private sector boards. So I can't with confidence tell you that that is, the case in Namibia. But what I can say is that where boards are run according to good corporate governance tenets, if that be in the public or private sector, because you also find that there are other public entities where this is not the case. Where boards are run according to tenets of corporate governance, you'll find that there's sound relationship. And if we're able to do continuous board development and continuous refreshing, and we're able to do retreats between board and management and also separately, then I think we are addressing issues that maintain that cordial relationship and that everybody is actually doing what they're supposed to do on the roles that they're serving. So it really is a matter of keeping to the standards and practices of good corporate governance.
The final question, and I'm putting you on the spot now here, it's that if the nation was to look at you and say, Vincia Cloete, you are our go-to person, as you are really now, in terms of these corporate governance issues. We have a situation at Namcor, and we want you to save that institution. The nation puts its trust in you. What is the way forward at Namcor? What should be what would you advise us to do as a country?
What I would advise us to do is what I've advised in the article. And I would maybe just emphasize that and say to the appointing authority to step into, a place of taking a position of doing an independent assessment. And I'm a lawyer, first of all, so I will not ever without assessing a situation, give you a solution or try and give you a recommendation of what should be done.
Yeah.
We should assess a situation, and it should be assessed independently, impartially, objectively, but it should be done thoroughly and diligently as well, so that the outcomes thereof point towards the future, but also to resolutions that are lasting for that entity and for the country as a whole. So the next step for me is that assessment and the removal of the board, and which I've just spoken about with your previous question. And once that is done, I think we're able to come to a place where we say, in that specific entity, these are the issues, and the board relationship with management is fraught with these specific issues in that specific organization, and then we can solve it from there. The things we've spoken about today are quite generic and are applicable to all organizations, but we need to go deep into that specific one and see how we can resolve it for them, because they sit on a huge national asset and we want to preserve that. There are talks of oil and gas, and we want to preserve the legacies that we want to build for Namibia as a whole, and we have to do it the right way. And this is the time for the appointing authority to act, and this is the time for those who know that they might be standing in the way of an assessment, or they might be the ones causing an unsavory relationship, to take up leadership ethically and say to themselves, maybe I should remove myself from here so that things are done the right way. So it's a question of taking accountability.
Absolutely.
Even as a board member or management,
Yeah. Vincia, thank you very much for your time. We are going to call you here again as long as these things persist, because we as a country need a direction, and people like yourself are very helpful in really opening our eyes and say, look, this could be the direction that the country should work into. So thank you for your time. We'll call you again here if I'll tell you now that we'll call you again. So please accept our invitation in the future.
It is accepted. Thank you, Tevin. I think we will have less meetings the more we do better governance. And I always tell people on an informal level, let's do governance right together. So if it's you and I doing it, let everybody else just join us and try and do governance the right way.
Absolutely. That was Vincia Cloete on the show tonight, filling us in on the intricacies of corporate governance. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening.